So let me officially welcome you to this session. It's such a pleasure to be here with all of you, and I want to thank you for taking the time to talk about negotiation today. So for those that don't know me, my name is Irene Kelly, and I am the Financial Education and Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Manager at Women's Economic Ventures. If you are new to WEV, welcome. We are very lucky to have you. WEV is a nonprofit organization supporting entrepreneurs through consulting services, learning programs, and access to capital. And today, we're going to be having a very exciting session called Know Your Worth with one of my favorite people and financial literacy ambassador, Carolyn McMahon. So we're going to be talking to her in a moment. And before that, I want to take a moment to thank our sponsors for the session, Bank of America. And for that, I would like to welcome to the space, Mary Noor. Mary is the Vice President of the Ventura and Santa Barbara area. She's an executive at Bank of America. And I just want to thank you, Mary, and thank Bank of America for being our financial empowerment partner and today's presenting sponsor. Mary, how are you?
Good. Thank you so much for having me. It's going to be a great session.
My pleasure. Is there anything you would like to share with the audience about our partnership and about how lucky we are to have these great partners in this space of financial empowerment and financial literacy?
Absolutely. Thanks, Irene. And thank you for everybody to join this event. I'm excited to hear from Carolyn on negotiating skills. I think that is definitely something that is needed, and especially with our women entrepreneurs, of how do you get your business into the next level. And when we looked at this partnership, we have connected with WEVE for several years now. And as financial literacy is very big for us at Bank of America, we do a lot of sessions around Ventura County and Santa Barbara County. And this was a perfect fit for us because we really felt that what WEVE does with our small business owners and those who want to become small business owners, that it is very important for them to elevate and empower women to make sure that they're making those decisions. Just a story to share with you. At a very young age, I moved to the States, and I remember having to go into the financial centers with my mom, and because she didn't speak English, right, and having to do those types of transactions at a very young age, and I told myself, you know what, I am definitely going to, financial literacy was huge for myself just to learn about banking. And lo and behold, here you go. Fast forward, I am a senior executive at Bank of America, and financial literacy personally to me is very important. So when we were able to have this opportunity with WEVE and to make that connection, it was a perfect match because we believe that through training such as this, through the consulting that WEVE offers, definitely empowers women to make sure that they take the next step within their business. So with that, Irene, thank you so much for having me here today. Karen and I look forward to hearing more from you. And I will pass it back to you, Irene.
Thank you, Mary, and thank you, Bank of America, for supporting our efforts, and thank you for your kind words. And now it's my pleasure to introduce you to, I was going to put my screen up, but let's just see each other's faces. I want to just take a moment to introduce you to today's speaker. Her name is Carolyn McMahon. Then Carolyn is a founder and lead consultant of an organization called Fem Finance, a consulting practice focused on financial health, which she founded here in Santa Barbara and is now based in Oakland, California. Carolyn is a negotiation expert, and she's also, as I was sharing earlier, she is a financial empowerment partner and financial literacy advisor for us here at WEVE. And we are very, very lucky to have her share her expertise, her wisdom. And I've personally worked with her around the topic of negotiation, and it can be truly empowering to gain the tools we need to demand what we need, right? Ask for what we deserve. And therefore, we talked about this topic of knowing your worth. So without further ado, Carolyn, welcome, and thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you so much, Irene. It's such a pleasure to be here. If you could give a thumbs up, are you seeing my screen?
Yes.
Fantastic. Okay, that'll be the hardest part for me today. Thank you all for joining. I really appreciate it, Mary. Thanks for your opening remarks. It's so important. I'm so grateful for the translation today. What an honor to have you compensating Kuka and Elise for what I cannot do, which is deliver this in Spanish. So thank you very much for doing that. Just a little bit more about me. Thanks for that really nice introduction. I am based in Oakland. I have spent 13 years working in the financial health, financial empowerment, and economic inclusion space. So most of my days I spend thinking about people's financial lives and working with companies and nonprofits and policymakers to advance financial empowerment. But I also hold 2 degrees in negotiation and conflict resolution. I studied up here in the Bay Area at Cal, and then I went back east and studied negotiation at the Fletcher School, which is part of the Harvard Project on Negotiation. I've also, maybe most important to me, talking to you today in this community, is that I am also a small business owner. As you said, Irene, I started my own consulting practice, Fem Finance, in Santa Barbara, up on the Mesa, in 2015. So what I'm sharing with you today are tips, tricks, experiences, not only from what I have learned as a practitioner, but also from what I'm facing and faced myself in my own negotiations as a business owner. So negotiation is a huge topic. We've called this Negotiation 101. In some ways, this is negotiation 001, right? My goal for you today is that you leave this session feeling more confident negotiating. And that's based on 2 things. One is centering your own value, and the other is using some practical techniques. So we'll do that with a little reflection. If we were in person, we'd do a lot of sharing, but we're going to do our best in the Zoom environment to do so. I've structured this talk around 3 common traps or pitfalls that we often find ourselves falling into in negotiations. Irene mentioned our work together. As part of Fem Finance, we run a small practice called Pep Talks, and that's individual one-on-one coaching. Many of the people who call us for coaching are negotiating a salary or raise discussion or a job offer. So we talk to a lot of people. And this presentation is in some ways grabbing lots of information from all those conversations and presenting them to you so that you can identify your own traps that you fall into, and we'll give you some tools to get out of them. Okay, let me set the stage with some really important stuff. This is a lot of words on a slide, but I really feel it's important to start by saying, why do we talk about negotiating as a woman? Why are we thinking about it in that term? Isn't that a little simplistic? Everyone negotiates. And I'd invite you to come up with your own sort of interpretation of this. Why is it important to consider gender when we're talking about negotiating? But here's my take for what it's worth. I think gender is a social construct and negotiations are a social experience. They take place in a social environment. So all the same biases that present themselves in our society around gender identity are going to show up in our negotiating environment. I want to be really clear that today is not a lesson about teaching you how to be more masculine to get more success. I think back in the day, that was sort of what we did as women to advance, and that is not what today is at all. Instead, I would really encourage you to think today about how it is that gender might influence our approach to negotiation. And also our other identities, our racial identities, what languages we speak, and what our employers speak. I just really encourage you to recognize how you show up to the world is influencing how you show up in negotiations. Let's start with a little reflection exercise. When you hear the word negotiation, what emotions come up for you? What feelings or emotions when you hear the word negotiation? I will encourage you to have a notebook that you're taking notes in throughout this presentation. We know writing things down makes them more memorable. We process them a little differently. And if you're so inclined, I'd love it if you dropped some of those in the chat. When you hear the word negotiation, what words and emotions come up for you? Thank you for sharing. Eileen says, ugh. I love that. It's my favorite expression actually in type. Anxiety, uncomfortable, contract, opportunity. Great, keep going. I'm going to keep going and have these in your head. I just wanted to get a pulse check for sort of where we are feeling on negotiation. But I'll remark that many of these are a little sort of negative, these emotions. Let's see if we can turn that around in the next hour. I want to start with a quote. This is actually from one of you. We've sent around a survey about opportunities for webinars, and many of you said that you wanted to focus on negotiation. And I thought this quote just really jumped out at me. Sometimes it's not negotiation with others, but with myself. This rings really true, especially when we're in business for ourselves, but even when we're not. So I really want to think about today being an opportunity to identify the traps that we set for ourselves that we fall in, that can prevent us from succeeding in negotiating, not only with ourselves, but also with others. So all the tools I'm presenting today are transferable to much more complex negotiations. But the examples that I've showcased today are mostly sort of small business examples. But again, I do quite a bit of work with employees also. So happy to take questions on that and think about these as really transferable skills. Okay, how many of you have heard something like this? Women are less likely to negotiate than men because they're naturally more risk averse. If they initiated negotiations, they'd be paid more and they'd have more success. I don't know, can we do emojis in the chat? I'd love to know if you've heard something like this, what emoji you have when you hear something like this. Feel free to drop it in the chat. Again, I wish we were in person, but we'll do our best with chat. Irene has the best face. I think I can make that face, eyebrow face. So I want to put a little pressure on this statement. So women are less likely to negotiate than men. Actually, that's getting less and less true. So 10 years ago, when we looked at the evidence from salary negotiations, men were 3 times as likely to negotiate than women. Today, it's about equal for women of all races. So that's great news. And that should give you some confidence because it means that the more of us negotiate, the more it normalizes negotiation for all kinds of people, right? And the more chances of success we have. Women are naturally more risk averse. My emoji would have been the eye roll face, just for the record. But the point I want to make on this is there is a bit of truth in this, and that's about risk aversion. So in truth, the risk aversion isn't about some natural characteristic. Often it's about really smart, learned instincts. The cruel truth is that sometimes when you negotiate, you have to face retaliation. Data supports that, right? That sometimes when women negotiate, we actually get worse outcomes. I say this because I want you to hear me. You're not crazy, right? This does happen. It's not a reason not to negotiate, but the way I think of this is listen to that intuition. Listen to what your high emotional intelligence is telling you about a situation. The trick is listening to that little voice and saying, is the voice that's telling me not to ask based on not having confidence, which we'll work on today? Or is it because I actually have a really good sense that the person I'm negotiating with isn't acting in good faith or might be sort of dangerous, right? In some way, preventing me from getting what I want. And if that's the case, you'll want to act with care. Finally, if women-initiated negotiations, they'd be paid more and have more success. Yes, absolutely, we've seen it happen. That's why I do what I do. And it's really important for me that you hear this. One negotiation isn't going to single-handedly dismantle the structures of sexism and racism that underlie our economy. There are many factors that influence your success in a negotiation. And it's important to recognize that and not put the pressure of all of those systemic issues on your shoulder with every negotiation you have. Again, this is not a reason not to negotiate, but it's an invitation to be easy on yourself. So today we're going to aim for this. We acknowledge that being underpaid and being undervalued is a result of structural factors. So is our anxiety about negotiation, those emotions you shared. We're going to honor and trust our instincts to guide our style and our approach to negotiation. And we believe that practical skills can give us more confidence and more comfort in negotiating. And that confidence and the comfort together can lead us to more success. And we'll spend most of the time together working on that confidence and comfort, but it's critical that first part sinks in. I want to just give a quick story, which is the reason I actually started Pep Talks and started this practice was that all of my girlfriends would call me right before they had a salary negotiation. And what I realized is the only ones who would call me back to tell me how they did were the ones who hit it out of the park. Carolyn, I'm making double my salary now. I did just what you asked and I got the extra time off I wanted. And what I realized is when I would call my friends who didn't call me and said, how'd it go? They were sort of embarrassed or ashamed for not getting what we'd talked about. And I said, that's silly. Actually, when I hear you talk, you have some really nice outcomes. Many times people would say, I didn't get the raise, but my boss really respects me more. And that's been really helpful. Or, I didn't get the raise, but I talked about my professional development, and now I have the opportunity to go to this conference next week. I'm on the plane to Phoenix. It's really critical to me that we center this discussion on value, on your human value. Your value is intrinsic. Today, we're going to be talking about money and prices and power. And it's very, very easy to start conflating power and money and price and what you win with your value, right? We start to see those as one and the same, but they're not. Your value is about you, who you are as a person, and no one can take that away from you, no matter how the negotiation goes. It's not related to how you perform in a negotiation or what you get from one single negotiation. So I'd really encourage you to write down this little mantra in the pink text. My value is not determined by this negotiation. I'm going to try to get more of what I want, but I'm valuable no matter what. Really let that sink in. I should mention, I'm happy to make some of these slides available after the talk, if you'd prefer to listen and reflect and not scribble too quickly. Let's do some personal reflection on negotiation. So when you think about your own negotiation experience, where do you excel? What strengths come to mind? And where do you get stuck? Go back to your piece of paper and write. Maybe it's 2 columns. What are you really good at? Where do you excel? And where are you getting stuck? And as you think about this, I want to remind you to think, yes, about this kind of negotiation, but also this kind of negotiation, or maybe this kind of negotiation. Where do you excel and where do you get stuck? If you feel inclined to share some in the chat, please feel free. Christiana, I see your question about the recording, and I will let someone at WEV respond to that at the end about where we could access that. Okay, keep this list handy, because as we go through the rest of the tips and tricks, I want you to be thinking about your own experiences and where you're getting stuck usually and where you're thriving, and how that might show up in the examples I'm going to give you of where I see other people getting stuck, where I see myself getting stuck. We're going to talk about 3 common pitfalls or traps that people fall into and give you the tools to improve or to get yourself out of those. Okay, the 3 traps are getting caught up on the number, not making a specific ask, and panicking in the moment. And if we have time, I'd love to give a little bonus note on style. Let's jump in. If we were in person, we'd have a lot of interaction. We'd be at tables together, we'd be role playing, but we're going to do the best we can here. I'm going to give you this little case. It's about Shayna at Shishi Salon. So go ahead and take a couple minutes to read this case. We're going to use it to do some examples throughout the time together. So I will be quiet and let you read silently, and thank you to our interpreters for doing the hard work on your line. You may wish to read this out loud if folks don't have the slides. You could drop a thumbs up in the chat when you're finished. That would be great. Take a couple more minutes. There won't be a test on this. So you don't need to memorize it, but take a few more minutes. And then thanks, Nicole. If you want to just drop a thumbs up or a smiley face in the chat when you're finished, we'll get started. Okay, great. You're going to see it again. I'm going to keep going for the sake of time. So our first big trap and question we're going to deal with is, what do you really want? It's really critical before you start a negotiation to take a moment and think about what you really want. So I want you to go back to your paper and write down everything that Shayna wants. I'll put the case back up and just take 30 seconds rapid fire. What is it that Shayna wants? And if you could also drop it in the chat after you've made a list. What is it that Shayna wants? Great. I see you in the chat. Thank you all. More financial stability. I see more time for herself. She wants a healthy business that's not in a loss, but also a good relationship. I see you already listing multiple interests, and that's great. So here are a few that I listed. You can check your paper and see if this is sort of in the zone that you're in. One thing she wanted was higher prices, right? At the end, she said she thinks she wants to raise prices. She wants to lower costs and increase revenue. Someone mentioned healthy business. I think this is another way of saying that. Stable rent, right? She's worried about that rent going up, but also less stress. She wants to sleep at night. She wants to keep those loyal clients. She wants to be likable, right? She doesn't want her friends to think badly of her. She wants to look busy, right? She said she likes the salon to feel full so that people feel like they're, part of something getting their haircut. And a happier staff. Many of you mentioned that. The point I want to illustrate here is that not only are there financial needs and wants, but there are many other interests that Shayna has. You listed many of them. Those are emotional needs and wants. They may be relational, and they may be reputational. And these wants are just as powerful, if not even more, than the actual financial needs of running her business. So a trap that we often fall into is that we fixate on the number, right? I need to raise prices or I'm gonna go under, without considering a range of interests that could make for a win in a negotiation. And the way to solve for this is to take the time to consider your own interests and think expansively. I like to think of having a big basket, and you're going to put all of your interests and fill that basket as high as you can. Really think expansively about your needs. I want to give you one other example to illustrate how this helps you. Let's say you have a landlord who wants to raise the rent 12%. Steep. And you've got a business owner, maybe that's you, and you want the rent to stay the same. You have no interest in paying that 12%. Now, if we're only looking here at the rent, what are we going to end up negotiating on? We're going to end up haggling over that 12%. Maybe I'm going to say, Irene, exactly, I can't do 12%. And maybe you'll say, can you do 10? I really can't do 10. Well, if you can't do 10, you're out, right? This is it. This is sort of a zero-sum game. Either you're going to pay the increase or you're going to have to leave. Now, watch what happens if we start to think about what our underlying interests are. So if I'm the business owner, one of the reasons I want to stay in this place is that I need the foot traffic. Let's say you're on State Street, right? Yes, I pay a premium for that already, but it's really important to my business to have people coming by. Also, I'm looking to reduce costs. I can't afford a 12% increase. In fact, if anything, I'd like to decrease my costs. And I might also be interested in expanding my customer base. Very common need for a business owner. Now, if we stop and think, what are the interests and wants of the landlord? So the landlord, they want on-time payments, right? They want a reliable tenant. But it might be that that landlord is also interested in this community, right? They want this thriving downtown community. And that landlord probably has other units. So it might be that they have other units to fill that are less desirable than their State Street properties, that people aren't jumping to get at, but they're actually cheaper than the spot you're in right now. Now, you might start to see how these interests overlap, right? So my interest for foot traffic and expanding my customer base actually have a lot to do with my landlord's interest in this thriving downtown community. And reducing my costs has this sort of nice overlap with this idea that the landlord has these cheaper units that they're trying to fill. If we start to express these interests and share them in a negotiation, we can get to a more creative solution than arguing over 12%. So maybe it's that the landlord's going to rent you the cheaper unit, but they, in their position of power over these businesses they rent, are going to start a referral program, a community referral. Maybe there's discounts. Maybe we're going to start to send foot traffic from one business to another. Suddenly, we have this much more expansive creative solution than we did where the premise was, if you don't pay 12%, you're out. So I'd encourage you to think about filling your basket and considering these different types of interests so that you can share them and potentially get to this better solution. Someone told me this reference isn't going to hold up very much longer, but do you remember Mary Poppins? Mary Poppins had a bag, a magic bag, right? And the beauty of Mary Poppins' bag is that she's prepared for every eventuality. So if it's a rainy day, there's a full-size umbrella in that bag. You can think of your list of interests as filling that magic bag. Having multiple interests is going to let you come up with more options for a solution that will feel like a real win for you. Not a second best, but a real win. And they can also prepare you to respond to a counter offer that you're not expecting, because you've got a bag of things to kind of look through and respond with. Okay, I'm going to go through one more section and then pause for questions. But I want to acknowledge, okay, great. You've got a Mary Poppins bag. You've done your homework and you're not going to fall into the trap of focusing on one number and leaving other things off the table. But the truth is now you need to make an ask. And some of you asked us about the support you need. You need support setting prices. You need support knowing what to charge. In a salary negotiation, you need to know what to ask for, what the number is. There's a trap. Trap number 2 is not making a specific ask. Women are 25% more likely to say they didn't ask for a specific amount the last time they negotiated. And what, you don't get what you don't ask for. So I want to give you some practical tips for how to come up and ask that you feel really good about. So if we go back to Shayna, she's saying, let's say she's just decided she wants to raise prices on all services. Now the question is, how much? How much should Shayna raise her prices? How do you pick that number? I'll put up the case again. Go ahead and think about it. How would you do this? How would you tell Shayna to pick that number? You can drop it in the chat if anyone has ideas. Is anyone doing math based on the price? Thank you. Christiana says, I distribute the entire percentage to different segments and spread them. So a calculation. I like it. Are others thinking the same way? I'm going to offer you, Irene says my brain went to do the math. What percent goes to customers? What can be absorbed? That's great. So what you're saying is true. The first step is you need to get a handle on your own accounting. And that's great. And that's something that's homework that you can do yourself. But I want to introduce another framework that we call objective criteria. Objective criteria are fact-based, commonly agreed upon points of information. So this acts as a bridge between your interests, your accounting, and what the person you're negotiating with is going to understand and needs to hear. The person you're negotiating with might not care about your own accounting, right? So how do you convince someone who doesn't care about your own circumstances what a reasonable price would be? We want to look to external objective criteria. So in this case, we could say, let's look at other price comps, comparable prices. So let's go up and down State Street. Let's see what everyone else is charging and compare. What are we charging to other people? This is very common in salary negotiations using a service like Glassdoor or the Salary Project. What you're doing is getting an external validation on your number, right, based on your accounting. Other criteria you could look at, industry standards, right? Is there a publication for stylists that says this is based on where you live, this is about what we charge? In other cases, news or events might matter. You know, if you've been affected by flooding and the community has, that could be a common standard that plays into your negotiation. Laws, social norms, reputable research. So the advice here is do your accounting, figure out sort of what you need, but then you need to go out into the world and find some kind of validator to help you justify and back up that ask. So we often feel nervous asking for a specific number, especially a big one. I think that's what holds us back. But the way to improve is to consider that interest and then find 1 or 2 criteria to justify your number. Now, I want to mention there's a second side of this coin. Trap number 2. Well, let me pause here and just check. Irene, are there any questions that have come through? I can't see all the questions.
Hi, dear. We have a couple of comments. No questions yet. And for our guests, you're welcome to put questions in the Q&A or in the chat.
Perfect. I'm going to keep zooming on, and then I'll pause another moment. So feel free to drop your questions in. Okay, part 2 of the trap around not making a specific ask. In trying to communicate our ask, sometimes we over justify. And you're saying, Carolyn, you just told me to go do my homework and I need 3 sources of objective criteria to back up my number. I did. But what I like to say is you need to do the work, but you don't need to show the work. Do you remember math class? This used to happen to me all the time. I would get a math test back and I got the right answer. But somewhere in the margins was like -1, -2, because the teacher had taken issue with the logic of how I got to the answer. So I'd shown my work, but she was distracted from the main answer to the problem by me showing my work. When you go into a negotiation, you don't want to give people so much information that they start to get distracted and poke holes in your argument. You want people to focus on your top line, which is your ask. The ask that you just determined and felt confident in getting those objective criteria. You want to present your ask and maybe 1 piece of data from your objective criteria. I have to tell you, this is probably the most common mistake I see people make, especially women. You go in for a raise conversation and you say, I have 35 reasons why I should get this raise. Let me list them for you. And then what happens is instead of focusing on the ask, which is a raise, you and your manager get in this tit for tat discussion about all 35 points. You've given them 35 different things to argue with instead of reacting to your ask. So just be cautious that over justifying can actually sabotage your ask. And it's very counterintuitive to many of us who've worked really hard and feel really good because we finally have the data. It's good to do that, do the work, feel confident, and put it aside. You don't want to confuse people by presenting too much information. I like to think about objective criteria as receipts, right? And just like a receipt, that doesn't come at the beginning, it comes at the end, right? Receipts, objective criteria give you confidence in your ask, in that what you're asking for is reasonable. And you can share it if you get challenged. So if you raise your prices and someone says, that's ridiculous, who would pay $100 for a haircut? You can say, actually, we surveyed every salon on State Street and our prices are no higher than anyone else's. And now you've shared some research, some objective criteria, those price comps, but you didn't have to start there. You can provide them, maybe you stick them in that Mary Poppins bag and pull them out when you need them. They can be very powerful, but again, you don't necessarily need to show them right away. Okay, let's take a breath I like to look at art when I'm breathing. Any questions so far? Look at your notes. Think about this swirl of ideas. Anything coming up for you that I can answer now?
Carolyn, while we get messages from the audience, I just want to share how much I loved the aspect of don't over justifying. I feel like as women, sometimes we're so used to explaining things, and this is why, and the accommodating of others around us, and over explaining things is just, like you said, it can sabotage your negotiation. So I'm really thankful for that piece.
I'm so glad it resonates. Like I said, it's probably the single most common thing I see. And it's also actually easy to correct if we just think about it.
Mm-hmm.
Any burning questions, or shall I keep going?
There's a question here. Any tips for not talking too much and over justifying? Drinking water can help me stop and let the other person speak.
Kate, I love that tip. And you also just segued perfectly to the next section. So let me answer that by going through the next set of slides. If I don't answer you, hold me accountable at the end. So far, we've talked about the trap of not thinking big enough about what can work for you in a negotiation, not being specific enough, but now what do you actually say? So let's practice that, because to Kate's point, what you actually say at the end of the day, you have to say something. So this is a common trap, and it happens to the best of us. We panic at the time of the conversation. Sometimes that's because negotiations are emotional, and that's normal. We're emotional beings, but the emotions come in and they crowd out all of the homework we did. So my answer to you, my number one tip, is to write yourself a script. And you don't have to read it. It's going to be so short that you can actually memorize it. But this script for me is the anchor, so that I don't let myself run off and over justify, or run off and apologize and accommodate my ask. The script will be your anchor. So let's go back to Shayna and really briefly think about, in your own words, what would you say in this situation? So you're Shayna, you're the salon owner, and your longtime customer, Bea, comes in for a haircut. She's been with you for years, and at the end of the haircut, you need to tell her about the price increase. You've decided to raise your price. What do you say? I'm going to really challenge you to put yourself in Shayna's shoes, and in your own voice, if you had to deliver this message, what would you say? Try to keep it to no more than 3 sentences. Great. Feel free to drop your ideas in the chat. Barbara says that the price increase should be announced tastefully in advance of the service provision. I like that. I like that word, tastefully. And I'm curious what words you would use to make sure it's done tastefully. And I like your emphasis on doing this before, right? So that it's not a surprise for that customer at the end of the cut. Okay, we have time, and I promised to do this if we had time. I'm going to take the time to give you a note on style. Valerie, thank you for sharing. Keep your script handy. We're going to talk about the script in 2 minutes, but I want to give a note on style. This is the most delicate thing I'll say today. And the most sensitive. And many negotiation trainings are going to skip right over this because it is sensitive and it's delicate. It is a common refrain that women who negotiate come off too strong. Now, I happen to find this sentiment obnoxious and unproductive and untrue. But it's still out there. Like we talked about the retaliation evidence, it still comes up sometimes. And so I'm really personally committed to addressing this because I have faced retaliation early in my career for asking for more money. I had a promotion rescinded, I had money taken away. So I think it's important not to ignore the fact that this still is a reality, even right now in many of the circles we run in and the people we deal with. And I want to share that the single most powerful tool I have seen work and most universal is gratitude. I've read a lot of books. I've tried a lot of things myself. I've coached people. I've seen this work. No question that the most useful tool is gratitude. Valerie teed us up beautifully in the chat. The first thing she said is that she loves working with her. What can you appreciate about the person you're delivering this news to? How can you honor the situation and the person you're communicating with? Gratitude is really powerful because if leading with gratitude, you also center your own humanity. So you start not from this place of, oh no, am I asking for the right number? You start with something that's genuine to yourself. Pick something you're truly grateful for. No lying in negotiations. That could be like a separate course, but I don't endorse fabrication or lies. So think about something you're really grateful for. Even a tricky situation, there's usually something to acknowledge. It really helps you prioritize the relationship. Negotiation 102 is all about relationships. And even though we haven't talked about that today, I hope you're starting to see how anticipating the needs of others will help you acknowledge the humanity and the behaviors and the values of the person you're speaking to. You might think gratitude sounds like a sort of soft, fuzzy word, or it's a little new age, or it's a little woo-woo. And it can be. But I'm here to also tell you as a businesswoman that gratitude is intelligent strategy. It is a savvy thing to do because starting with gratitude can disarm the person you're coming to speak with, who might be ready to think, you're selfish, you're thinking only of your own interests, you're not thinking about me on the other side of the table. Gratitude can disarm and prime you for a more productive conversation. So here's my keep it simple sample script, my KISS script. Lead with gratitude. Set the stage. Very briefly, using one of your objective criteria, not 35, and then make your ask. Make it clear, make it that top thing on your basket, and then challenge yourself to stop talking. So here's the example. Bea, I'm so appreciative that you've stuck with me all these years. Gratitude. I don't have to tell you, times have been tough on small businesses. With inflation, costs are up 40% since we opened. Objective criteria, right? Inflation, that's something that's we're not going to debate. We're all in that together. Starting next month, I'm going to be raising prices 25% on all services to accommodate. There's your ask. Be disciplined, include your number, right? We didn't say I'm raising prices. We said I'm raising prices 25%. And don't undercut, don't over justify. I do want to acknowledge that in some ways, this example negotiation was a negotiation with yourself, right? If you're a business owner, it's your prerogative to set prices. It's actually your job to set prices. The truth is, and I know many of you feel this way from your feedback, it often feels like a negotiation to set prices because you're trying to persuade a potential customer that you're offering, that your services are offering the right value for price. So I really do consider this a negotiation example, even though some people might say, just raise your prices. I think we all know it doesn't always feel that way. And you are trying to preserve those relationships, which two of you mentioned in the chat. Let's do a little reflection on all that we've zoomed through and covered today. We've answered some sort of 3 questions by showing traps, right? What do you really want? What's your ask? And what do you actually say? Thinking about all of this material, I want you to go back to your notebook and actually write down a moment of reflection. What is one technique that we talked about that you'll try in future negotiations? And think about those strengths you listed at the beginning. What's something you're really good at, whether it's in business with vendors or at the dining room table with your kids? What's a strength that you thought, I do that really well, and I'm going to keep doing that with even more intentionality? Please do write it down. You know, all the neuroscience tells us how powerful it is to write things down. And if you want to share in the chat, I'd be so grateful to hear a little bit about what you're taking away from the lessons we've talked about. As you're jotting down, we have to end here, which is where we started. We called this session Know Your Worth. And I wish you nothing but success in your future negotiations. I hope that by filling your basket and using some criteria, help you feel more confident in your ask. And that you keep your ask simple and you don't try to over justify, and that leading with gratitude will help you get more of what you want. But again, we've got to remember this affirmation. It's in some ways the most important thing, that your value is not determined by this negotiation. You're going to use these tools to try to get more of what you want. but you're valuable no matter what happens in that conversation. And I want to add that you making that ask is helping all of us take a step forward and make progress. Because the more we normalize asking for what we want and feeling confident doing it, the more we all succeed, truly. I'll pause and take questions. I'm just so pleased to be reading as I talk, multitasking, reading your comments coming into the chat. I want to end actually with an offer. I mentioned I do this in a one-on-one session. I do private coaching, and we at Fem Finance are committed to offering everybody a free hour of negotiation coaching. So you can go to our website, femfinance.org/pep talks, and you'll see a little calendar schedule, and you can just book right on my calendar. We really recommend this if you have a situation that's upcoming, urgent, something you're really working through. Then we start by you giving me the problem and we workshop it together. It's not a workshop like this, it's us working together on a plan. I'd really encourage you to take advantage of that. We really feel like this is part of our mission toward equity, and the more people who know about it, the better. So please feel free to use it and share it far and wide. Let me pause there. And if there are any questions that I haven't seen in the Q&A, Irene, please interrupt me, and I'm happy to answer those.
I don't see any questions in the Q&A yet. I'm gonna add your website in the chat as well, Carolyn.
Perfect, thank you for doing that. Well, if there are no questions, before you close it out, Irene, I just want to say thank you again for the participation. I know it can be rough in Zoom. It can feel a little not human, but I really appreciate you spending the time with us. Thank you to our interpreters who had the hardest job today to interpret this in real time. I really appreciate it. And good luck. We're all in this together.
Carolyn, I'm so thankful as well for you and for sharing your wisdom. I love how you close with this beautiful affirmation of, at the end of the day, I'm valuable no matter what. You are all valuable no matter what. And I love that you close with that. The more tools we have in our Mary Poppins bags, the better we're gonna feel, the more confident we're gonna feel negotiating. And I just thank you for reminding us that the more we stand up for ourselves, the more we're standing up for others around us, and especially as women. So that was lovely, and I'm sure that that our audience, as they shared in the chat, that they took some nuggets of gold that you shared with us. So we are beyond grateful for all of your support. Also, your support with our financial empowerment initiatives has been instrumental. So I want to thank you for that as well. And thank everyone in the audience. We will be sending a follow-up email with the materials that Carolyn shared today. Is that okay, Carolyn?
Yes, yeah, happy to provide. I'll send you the slides right after so we can make those available.
Perfect. So we will be sending you that. If there are no more comments or questions, well, you'll have our contact information, so you can always reach out afterwards. I know that there's a lot to reflect. There's a lot of great homework that we have here. So thank you. Thank you again, Carolyn, and thank you everyone for joining us.
My pleasure.
Bye, dear. Thank you.